The Navy spent $264 million, more than $2.5 billion in today's money, to build the single most powerful warship on planet Earth. And the second she was finished, she couldn't get home. Not because of a storm, not because of an enemy, because of a number. A number carved into solid rock 50 years before she ever existed, by engineers who never once imagined a ship like her. This is the story of the USS Kitty Hawk, the ship that would go on to become the oldest aircraft carrier, and for a stretch of years, the oldest active-duty warship of any kind in the entire United States Navy. And it's the story of two separate times, 61 years apart, when that same 50-year-old number sent her 12,000 miles out of her way. Welcome back to Navy Grid, where every ship's got a story bigger than her spec sheet, and we chart it out, start to finish. Let's start at the beginning. She was named Kitty Hawk for the little stretch of North Carolina coastline where the Wright brothers got a machine off the ground for the first time in human history. There's something almost funny about that once you know how this story ends. At just under 1,100 feet long, she stretched out to nearly 3 football fields laid end to end. Her flight deck spanned 282 feet at its widest point. She displaced over 82,000 tons fully loaded, carried more than 80 aircraft, and needed a crew of over 4,500 sailors just to keep her running. When she was commissioned in April of 1961, she was, by cost alone, the single most expensive machine ever built by human hands. She'd been laid down at a shipyard in Camden, New Jersey, back in December of 1956, when Dwight Eisenhower was president. By the time they finally commissioned her, 4.5 years later, John F. Kennedy was in the White House. That's how long it takes to build something like this. An entire presidential term just to put one ship in the water. They couldn't even launch her the normal way. Most ships slide down a ramp into the river, stern first, with a splash. Engineers were afraid that if they tried that with Kitty Hawk, her sheer mass would carry her clean across the Delaware River and into the far shore. So instead, they flooded the dry dock around her and just floated her out. Quietly, almost like they were embarrassed by how big she'd gotten. Here's the thing about being the biggest ship on Earth in 1961. America already had a shortcut built for exactly this situation. It's called the Panama Canal, and for nearly 50 years it had been the fastest way for a Navy ship to get from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific, cutting a 12,000-mile trip down to less than 50. Kitty Hawk's new home port was San Diego. She'd been built on the East Coast. The canal was sitting right there, waiting. There was just one problem: she didn't fit. The original locks of the Panama Canal, finished in 1914, measure exactly 110 feet wide. That's the ceiling. Doesn't matter who you are or how many stars are on your collar, if your ship is wider than that, you are not getting through. Kitty Hawk's hull, measured at the waterline, came in at 130 feet. Her flight deck, the part that actually mattered, stretched out to 282. She wasn't a little too wide for the shortcut. She was more than 2.5 times too wide. It hadn't always been this way. When the Navy built the Iowa-class battleships during World War II, ships like the USS Missouri, the one where Japan formally surrendered, engineers designed the whole hull specifically to squeeze through those locks. Their beam came out to 108 feet, 2 inches. That left about 22 inches of clearance, total, split between both sides of the ship. 11 inches to spare on the left, 11 on the right. Sailors who served on those battleships talk about watching the lock walls slide by close enough to touch. The Navy cared that much about keeping the shortcut open. They compromised on how a battleship was armored just to keep her small enough to fit through a canal. Then, in 1945, right at the tail end of the war, the Navy commissioned the first Midway-class carriers, and for the first time on purpose, somebody in Washington said, "Forget the canal. Build them as big as they need to be to win." By the time Kitty Hawk came along 16 years later, that decision had already hardened into simple fact. Nobody was losing sleep over the Panama Canal anymore. Which left one very real, very physical problem. How do you move an 82,000-ton warship from the Atlantic side of the country to the Pacific side if the shortcut is completely off the table? There was only one route left on the map: the long way, down the entire length of the Atlantic, around the very bottom tip of South America, and back up the other side. On August 11, 1961, Kitty Hawk pulled out of Naval Station Norfolk and pointed her bow south. Most of the sailors aboard were barely out of their teens, and a lot of them had never left the country before in their lives. Now they were about to spend nearly 3 months at sea, on a ship so new you could still smell fresh paint in some of the passageways. Their first stop was Rio de Janeiro, where the carrier picked up the Secretary of the Brazilian Navy for a demonstration exercise alongside 5 Brazilian destroyers. For a few days, the newest, most expensive warship on the planet was showing off for a foreign dignitary in the middle of the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from anywhere its crew called home. On September 11th, less than a month into the voyage, Lieutenant Clayton Wiley brought a skyraider in for a landing on Kitty Hawk's deck, and logged the ship's 1,000th arrested landing while he was at it. A ship not even 5 months old, already racking up a number most carriers take years to reach. 11 days later came the Equator. On September 22nd, Kitty Hawk crossed the line for the first time in her life, which meant one of the oldest traditions in the entire Navy, the Shellback initiation. Every sailor who'd never crossed by sea before, and on a ship this new, that was most of the crew, went through the ceremony at the hands of the ones who already had. Part hazing, part theater, part bonding ritual that stretches back centuries. But the real test wasn't a ceremony, it was still ahead of them: Cape Horn. If you know anything about maritime history, that name carries weight. Cape Horn sits at the exact point where the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Southern Ocean all collide, and for 400 years it swallowed ships. Winds that hit hurricane force with no warning. Waves that regularly top 40 and 50 feet. Sailors called it the ship's graveyard for a reason. Historians estimate some 800 vessels wrecked there, and roughly 10,000 sailors died trying to round it, almost all before the Panama Canal opened and gave ships another way through. Kitty Hawk rounded the Horn on October 1st, 1961. 82,000 tons of brand new American steel, sailing straight through the same waters that had been killing wooden ships since the 1600s. She made it through without a scratch. The very size that had locked her out of the shortcut in the first place was exactly what let her shrug off water that would have ended a smaller ship. From there, she pushed north, stopping in Valparaiso, Chile, then Callao, Peru, where she hosted the president of Peru himself. And finally, in early November, after nearly 3 months and more than 12,000 miles at sea, Kitty Hawk approached San Diego. There was one more problem waiting. San Diego's harbor wasn't deep enough for her either. The Navy had to dredge an entirely new 42-foot channel just so their newest carrier could reach port. And when she finally slid into it, sailors on a nearby ship broke out a swing band and started playing California, Here I Come. Sit with that image for a second. A ship too big for the shortcut everyone else got to use. Too big, even, for the harbor that was supposed to be her home, until the Navy carved out a bigger one just for her. And the moment she finally arrived, after the longest way around anybody could draw on a map, the welcome she got was a song about coming home. She spent the next several decades proving the trip had been worth it. By the mid-1960s, Kitty Hawk was deep into the Vietnam War, flying strike after strike from a stretch of ocean sailors nicknamed Yankee Station in the Gulf of Tonkin. Across 6 combat tours, and especially during the Tet Offensive between December of 1967 and June of 1968, she and her air wing flew 185 major strikes, hitting the heavily defended Hanoi and Haiphong areas more than 60 times. For that stretch of fighting, Kitty Hawk became the first aircraft carrier in United States history to receive the Presidential Unit Citation. Not one of the first. The first. It's not just the combat record that makes her stand out, though. It's some of the almost unbelievable side missions she got pulled into. In August of 1963, off the coast of San Diego, the CIA and the Navy used her deck to attempt something nobody on Earth had ever done before. launching a U-2 spy plane, the same kind of aircraft the Soviets had shot down over their own territory just 3 years earlier, straight off an aircraft carrier. Test pilot Bob Schumacher took off in a run of just 321 feet, barely a third of the flight deck, and climbed away clean. The landing did not go as well. His U-2 bounced, clipped a wingtip on the deck, and barely limped back into the air before running out of room. Kitty Hawk had just become the first carrier in history to launch a spy plane, and also the reason engineers went back to the drawing board before trying again on a different ship. Somewhere in between all of that, she found time for Hollywood. In 1966, Kitty Hawk appeared in Disney's LT. Robin Crusoe, USN guests who walked her decks over the years included a sitting president in John F. Kennedy, novelist John Steinbeck, and singer Nancy Sinatra. One ship holding all of that at once. A war, a spy plane test, a Disney movie. Not every story on board was that light. In March of 1984, during joint exercises with South Korea, a Soviet submarine named K-314 had been quietly trailing Kitty Hawk's battle group for hours, the way both sides shadowed each other constantly through the Cold War. Late one night, that submarine surfaced directly in her path. Neither ship had time to react. The 80,000-ton carrier struck the sub at speed, tearing a hole in her own bow that sent thousands of tons of jet fuel pouring into the Sea of Japan. By sheer luck, none of it caught fire and nobody died. But for a few minutes in the dark, two nuclear powers came closer to a real international incident than most people ever found out. By the early 2000s, Kitty Hawk had earned a title that had nothing to do with combat at all. Ship after ship from her generation retired, one by one, until nobody left in the fleet was older than her. She became the oldest active duty warship in the entire United States Navy, a record she'd hold until her own retirement, having served under 9 different presidents, forward deployed out of Yokosuka, Japan, as the only carrier the Navy kept permanently stationed overseas. But every ship's career ends eventually, no matter how many records she sets. In August of 2008, Kitty Hawk sailed into San Diego one final time, the same port she'd reached 47 years earlier, the long way around, with a swing band playing her home. This time, there was no dredging required. The Navy already had a spot waiting, just not the kind of spot a ship wants to end up in. She was officially decommissioned on May 12, 2009, after just under 48 years of service. And then, she waited. For more than a decade, Kitty Hawk sat in the reserve fleet at Bremerton, Washington, rusting quietly, while people tried and failed to raise enough money to save her as a museum ship. In October of 2021, the Navy finally sold her. Sold the most expensive warship on the planet back in 1961 for a single American cent, 1 penny. Along with her sister ship, the USS John F. Kennedy, also sold for a penny, both bound for a scrapyard in Brownsville, Texas. And here's where the story folds back on itself. To get from Bremerton, Washington to Brownsville, Texas, there's an obvious route. Down the west coast, through the Panama Canal, up into the Gulf of Mexico. Fast, direct, the shortcut. Kitty Hawk couldn't take it. 61 years after her very first voyage, the ship that had grown up to become the oldest carrier in the entire United States Navy was still too wide for the Panama Canal. Even the newer, wider locks the canal finished building in 2016 weren't enough for a flight deck like hers. So in January of 2022, under tow, her engines long since gone cold and silent, Kitty Hawk left Bremerton one final time and pointed south, toward Cape Horn. Again. It took roughly 5 months and more than 16,000 miles for a single tugboat to drag her lifeless hull around the bottom of South America. Through the same waters her escorts had steamed past 61 years before, and up into the Gulf, to a yard waiting to cut her apart for scrap. Think about what that actually means. The exact same limitation that greeted this ship on the first day of her career was still sitting there, waiting, on the very last day of her existence. In the 61 years between those two voyages, she served under 9 presidents, fought through a war, survived a Cold War collision, hosted a spy plane test nobody had ever attempted before, and set a longevity record no other ship in the fleet could touch. And not one single inch of that canal ever got wider for her. She was born taking the long way home, and she died taking the long way to her grave, and in between, nothing about that one measurement ever changed. There's something almost unsettling about that if you actually sit with it. We like to believe that progress eventually fixes things, that if a limitation is inconvenient enough, somebody solves it. But the Panama Canal got its expansion in 2016, and it still wasn't built with a ship like Kitty Hawk in mind. Some problems don't get solved. They just get lived with, generation after generation, until the thing that outgrew its shortcut finally runs out of years. Kitty Hawk never got hers, not once in almost half a century of service. And somehow, that's exactly what makes her story worth telling. She never needed the easy way. She proved that over and over for 48 years. So here's what I want to know. If you'd been a 19-year-old sailor on that flight deck in October of 1961, watching Cape Horn's waves crash over the bow of the biggest ship you'd ever seen in your life, would that have terrified you? Or would it have been the proudest moment you'd ever have? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if stories like this, the ones buried 3 paragraphs deep in an official Navy history nobody reads anymore, are the kind of thing you want more of, that's exactly what Navy Grid exists for. Every ship in this fleet is carrying a story like Kitty Hawk's somewhere in her logbook. Finding them is the whole job. Hit subscribe and come find the next one with me.